Welcome to Her Coder Story. I'm Motunrayo. I'm a community manager, a researcher, a storyteller who's working at the intersection of community and technology. So, this podcast exists because for a very long time, I rarely heard women or I rarely saw women like me reflected in tech narratives, or I felt that maybe sometimes when the stories are told, then parts that are missing, the parts that matter the most, were missing. So, Her Coded Story is a podcast exploring the varied, complex, and colorful journeys of women across technology, not just how they enter tech, but how they've managed to stay in it, how they're navigating it, and how they're shaping it. This is a cross community podcast, by the way, by Product Led Alliance and the AI Accelerator Institute. If you don't know who we are, the Product Led Alliance supports product leaders, growth experts, and go-to professionals through learning and community. And the AI Accelerator Institute does the same for AI practitioners, researchers, engineers, and technical leaders. Both communities essentially exist to make learning accessible, and we have an immersive platform that includes articles, podcasts, reports, and videos, you name it. Of course, this series being one of them. Anyway, more than anything else, this podcast is for women in tech who want to hear real stories that they can recognize themselves in. So I thought the best way to begin this series, this podcast, was by introducing myself and sharing my journey into tech, a journey that's messy and definitely not linear. My path into tech wasn't fancy. There are no job titles attached. It's not perfectly aligned with a career towards a career ladder. Actually, if you looked at my CV, you might be confused. You would probably see it would it looks like someone who just had way too many interests trying to, explore everything. I've been a founder associate. I've been a database designer. I was an operation analyst. I even had a brief stint as a product manager. And I've also been a founder myself. I've tried out, the founder life. I've tried out, being a startup founder. However, one thing that remained consistent throughout my entire career is community and events. Actually, let's go back. Let's rewind. Let's rewind it. Originally, I wanted to study fashion business. Fashion still has my heart, honestly. Like I still dream about working in fashion. And maybe I might one day, maybe through a fashion tech startup, I might. Who knows? But anyway, fashion was what I was going to study. I was going to study fashion business. But I thought, you know, fashion is something I could do anytime, although I still haven't done yet. Um, Studying business might be more practical, right? And then I thought, you know, maybe business with IT, because at the time I thought, technology, or I saw that technology was just embedded into everything, and it felt like a practical decision. So that was how, that was the first step. So during my degree, I fell in love with technology. I honestly just loved how tech could enhance and improve like our lives. And that's kind of like when something clicked for me. That was when I was like, oh, let me explore, you know, a career in technology. And that was when I started to seek out, people who looked like me or people like me who were exploring or, building a career in tech. My first role after uni was actually at a health tech startup. And I was actually their first, fun fact, I was their very first employee. Um, the role was messy because obviously it wasn't defined, but it was my entry into the startup world. And, I'd never imagined I'd work in startups. I thought I'd end up at a big corporate company. But, startups pulled me in and I learned a lot. So after leaving that role, I started to seek more ways of like, okay, what's available to me? What can I do? How can I, explore technology more? How can I build a career in technology? So I attended an event that was focused on getting more girls into tech. And that was the first time I kind of realized how, you know, out of the traditional tech narrative I was. Like I was like, oh, like I don't look like the typical, tech person. And, I desperately wanted to like see more people like me. I desperately wanted to hear stories like mine, or, I wanted to hear stories from women who looks like me. I wanted reassurance that, I belong here and I can excel here and I can actually, build a career here. So in 2017, I started like a community for Black women in tech. I collaborated with different companies, created space where women could, share their stories through networking and empowerment events. And it was amazing. It was incredible. And I later landed a role that I believed that I believed might finally be my path into, the big leagues, the big boys. But instead, it became the role where my imposter syndrome was the loudest. It became the role where I felt like, whoa, can I do this? Can I really do this? Is this something for me? Um, I worked very hard as you do. I tried to prove myself, but what happened was the goalpost just kept shifting. And eventually the pressure just turned into a deep mental health distress. And that distress showed up physically in my body, right? It shows up physically. And that was a turning point for me. Um, that was like the moment where I was diagnosed with anxiety. But being diagnosed with anxiety helped me realize there was a serious gap in support, especially for Black women, because it took nearly a year to receive a diagnosis. So what did I do? I quit tech and then I went to do a master's. And then after the master's, I decided to start a well-being startup for Black women. And at the time, I truly believed, oh my gosh, I could do it all. I could do everything. And, I built the business, or I tried to build the business. And, I faced constant obstacles, funding challenges, recognition, and then eventually being diagnosed with ADHD. And, that diagnosis changed everything for me. It made me realize I've been working in ways that were just fundamentally against my body and my brain. And, over the 2 years that I tried to, 2, 3 years that I tried to build the business, the first 2 years actually, I joined about 4 different accelerator and like fellowship programs. And at one point, I was doing 3 simultaneously. Don't ask me why. Just, I would not recommend. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. One of them was a full-time year-long fellowship with a year-long fellowship called Year Here. And shout out to my YH family. I loved that. I loved that experience. The fellowship experience was just incredible. It's Year Here essentially was a fellowship that brought people who wanted to build solutions to the problems that are plaguing our community, our societies the most. Just brings them together to train them, allow them frontline experiences, and just allow them to also like build their initiatives and allow them to innovate. It was amazing. It was incredible. I met amazing people. I also joined NEF Plus, which is a program by the Center for Entrepreneurs, and then I did Black Girl Fest Launchpad. Anyway, those programs were amazing. It really made me. I think that was me in my startup founder era. Like I was in my startup founder era. I was everywhere. The meetings, the events, everything. It was incredible. It was amazing. But again, I was doing too much. I was doing way too much. But you know what? That season taught me leadership. It taught me resilience. It taught me courage. It taught me that if you have an idea, you don't need permission to build it. Just do it. And it taught me that storytelling can be powerful, not just for visibility, but for community and support. Because when I started that business, when I started it, I had no money to give anybody. I couldn't afford to pay anyone, but I had amazing and incredible experts who came on board to build it with me based off of the story alone. But anyway, eventually I hit a wall. And it's no surprise that I hit a wall with all the, obstacles that I faced, funding challenges, lack of recognition. It's no surprise that that happened. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but only around 2% of VC funding goes to female founders. And out of that, only just about 0.2% goes to Black women. At some point, I asked myself, was this system rigged beyond repair? I mean, the game's rigged. Like, am I going to win here? What's happening? What's going to happen? And I had to like just re-strategize or recalibrate, if you will. And that meant, closing the business. Not really, at the time, it felt like, at the time, I felt like a failure. I felt you had one job and it was to build something um essential for your community. Because again, my lived experience allowed me to realize Black women are more likely to develop mental health disorders, but least likely to get help. That was what, and my lived experience was what, um, inspired the startup idea. And having to close it made me feel like a failure. I felt like I had failed my community. I failed the women who, like me, took them years to recognize what mental health distress looked like. I just felt like a failure. I just felt like, yeah, I failed. I had one job and I failed. And now I know that closing the business didn't make me a failure because I tried, right? I did it. But it was also an act of care. I had to put myself first at that point because building the business became to take its toll. Being a tech startup founder started to, just take its toll on me, and I needed to step back. So I had to return to the things that gave me joy, like, events, storytelling, community, human connection, just, connect with human. And it inspired me to kind of to decide to pursue a master's in AI, to better understand the technologies that are shaping our future. And I am still on that journey. I'm still trying to, finish this startup because, it's not easy. But in many ways, it brought me to what I love. It brought me back to what I love the most, building communities, which is why we're here. Which is why we're here. So, How Coded Story isn't a podcast about perfectly curated careers. It's about real journeys. You know, there's a gap between there's a visibility and voice gap in tech. We might see women represented, but we might not hear their full story because, their stories are often flattened or not showcased enough. And it's also to acknowledge that leadership, it's to acknowledge that motherhood, culture, care, and identity doesn't just disappear because you're working in tech. And it's not something we refrain from talking about when we're talking about tech. These conversations belong in tech. We need to have these conversations when we talk about, technology and people building careers in technology. And it's also, as AI and data are shaping our world, we need more human-centered storytelling. We need voices that reflect, that question, that, design with intention. So just to reiterate, this podcast isn't about success. It's more about sustainability. It's about authenticity. Over authenticity, authenticity. Yes, it's about authenticity. That word sometimes sounds weird, but it's about authenticity. Authenticity. You know what I mean. And so I'm making, the path a little clearer for the women coming next. So this season will feature monthly episodes with women across technology, all aspects of technology, product, AI, data, engineering, research, sales, and just go beyond. And the recurring themes would be, how they found their way into tech, navigating and leading in a male-dominated space, shaping systems and teams for the future. It's redefining success and remaining human along the way. So although this podcast is brought to you by Product-Led Alliance and AI Accelerator Institute, you do not need to work in AI or product to belong here. If you're navigating technology as a woman, this space is for you, designed specifically for you. So I'll leave you with this. So many women think they're behind because their journey doesn't look like the ones they see online. But most paths aren't linear and they're not beautiful. They're very messy. And they're usually shaped by curiosity, by resilience, by pauses, by rest and recalibration. Sometimes you just have to, re-strategize, drop it and pick it back up. her coda story essentially is to showcase that you need to trust the process. The process might not look pretty, but trust the process. And, this is the invitation. This is your invitation to trust the process, to, allow your story to blossom. Even when it doesn't make sense yet, allow your story to blossom, to grow, to unfold, to unravel. So my hope is that, in listening to these conversations and listening to the stories, you feel less alone, you feel more grounded and more confident in the fact that there's no single way to belong in tech. And there's no single pathway into tech. And, your stories matter. Our stories matter. So, this is her coded story. I'm Motunrayo. And if you're here, your story matters too. Thank you, and see you soon.